In a grand international summit hall, Vladimir Putin entered with the aura of a man who believed the world still bent to his will. He had spoken countless times before leaders of nations. Yet this particular gathering was different. The audience was not Europe, nor Asia, it was Africa. Leaders from across the continent sat waiting, eager to hear what Russia's president had to say about global alliances, trade, and security. Putin's calculation was simple: intimidate, assert dominance, and remind Africa of Russia's military and economic reach. He believed Africa would listen, perhaps nod, and ultimately follow. The Kremlin's plan was to turn Africa into a stage for Russian influence, submissive, dependent, and unquestioning. But Putin had not accounted for one man, Ibrahim Traoré, the young and fearless leader of Burkina Faso. Colonel Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly as Putin's words filled the hall, dressed not in a polished Western suit, but in his simple military attire. Traoré embodied something raw and unshakable. His presence was magnetic, young, unyielding, and symbolic of Africa's rising voice. He listened intently as Putin spoke about partnerships, though the tone felt closer to veiled commands. The Russian leader referenced supporting Africa against Western dominance, but the undertone suggested Africa could only be free by aligning with Moscow. The young Burkinabe leader's eyes never wavered. He had heard such rhetoric before, colonial promises of partnership that turned into chains of dependency. He knew history, and he knew his people's pain. When the time came for responses, Traoré slowly rose to his feet. The hall shifted. Cameras turned. Silence fell. Putin concluded with confidence, his words carrying the weight of power. Africa must understand. Strength comes from standing with Russia. Without allies like us, you are vulnerable. The words lingered like a challenge in the air. Traoré, his voice steady yet sharp, began. Mr. President, Africa has been told this story many times. We were told to bow to Europe. We were told to bow to America. Now you come and tell us to bow to Russia. But let me say this clearly, Africa bows to no one. Gasps filled the hall. Delegates leaned forward. Translators repeated his words, and suddenly the atmosphere crackled with energy. Traoré's voice grew stronger with each sentence, not with anger, but with conviction. For centuries, Africa's wealth was stolen. Our people were divided, our dignity stripped, first by colonial powers, then by those who replaced them with economic chains. Every time, we were told it was for our own good. But today, Africa speaks for itself. We are not children waiting for guardians. We are not pawns in another empire's game. Burkina Faso, and all of Africa, will rise by our own strength, not by submission. Every word struck like thunder. Leaders from Ghana, Mali, Senegal, and beyond nodded in silent agreement. The hall that once seemed dominated by Russian authority now pulsed with African pride. For perhaps the first time in years, Vladimir Putin found himself without a rehearsed response. His eyes narrowed, his lips pressed thin. He was a man accustomed to control of rooms, of narratives, of power itself. Yet here stood a young African leader, unafraid, challenging him openly before the world. Putin adjusted his suit, leaned forward toward the microphone, and tried to mask his surprise with a thin smile. But the cameras had already caught the flicker of shock in his eyes. The silence in the hall after Traoré's words was profound. It wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of realization. Every leader present knew they had witnessed something historic. The Russian delegation shifted uncomfortably. Advisors whispered behind Putin. But no one could erase the words already spoken. The audience outside the hall, millions watching the live broadcast across Africa, erupted in applause, their pride swelling as they saw one of their own stand tall against a superpower. Within hours, the exchange went viral. Headlines blazed across the internet. Traoré defies Putin, Africa's voice of resistance. Burkina Faso leader to Russia, Africa bows to no one. The clash that shook global politics. Clips of Traoré's fearless words spread across TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and news broadcasts worldwide. Some celebrated him as a hero. Others accused him of reckless defiance. But no one could ignore him. For the first time in decades, Africa was not portrayed as a passive stage for global power struggles. Instead, it was seen as a rising force of resistance, unity, and dignity. Burkina Faso, once a small nation often overlooked on the world map, suddenly became a symbol of courage. Traoré's words transformed his country into a beacon of resistance against global arrogance. Students in Ouagadougou painted murals of the young leader, fists raised, with the words, "Africa bows to no one." Songs were written. Chants echoed in markets and streets. Even leaders from other African nations quietly drew inspiration. Burkina Faso's story was no longer just its own. It became Africa's. The world began to take notice. Analysts on global news networks debated the meaning of Traoré's defiance. Was this the beginning of a new Africa, one no longer dictated to by East or West? Could this small country truly ignite a movement across the continent? In the months that followed, leaders across Africa echoed similar sentiments. They spoke with newfound confidence in global forums. They demanded fair trade, true partnerships, and respect. Traoré's words had not only confronted Putin, they had awakened Africa's voice. History is rarely made in carefully scripted speeches. More often, it erupts in moments of courage, when one voice dares to speak truth to power. That day, in that hall, Ibrahim Traoré's fearless reply changed the narrative. Putin came expecting obedience, but left facing resistance. And the world saw Africa, not as weak, but as unbreakable. As Traoré himself declared, "Let it be written today, Africa bows to no one." And indeed, from that moment, the world would never look at Africa the same way again.